Best scene. Death surprises the executioner. Act 1, Scene 1. 1930s, Gulag in the USSR. Prisoners are huddled together under blankets in the evening.
What did you do before the revolution, comrade?
I was a teacher, and you?
I was a peasant, a farmer on a nobleman's estate. They never taught me to read or write. That was for the aristocracy.
And you missed a great deal, my friend.
What did you teach?
I taught stories told by the great Russian authors, and sometimes I wrote stories for the newspapers.
What kind of stories?
All kinds of stories.
Well, comrade, since we must fill our evening till they put us back to work again tomorrow morning, maybe you would be so kind as to tell us one of those stories.
What sort of story would you like to hear?
Any story will do, comrade.
Very well, then. I shall tell you the story of the wedding party. And the story happened near Tashkent. Do you know the place, my friend?
I have heard of it.
Well, it happened in the winter time. A young nobleman whose estate was near Tashkent was getting married to a lovely young woman in a small village some distance away. The wedding party was large, and from the groom's side included his father and mother, his sister, and many handsome young men. They traveled by sleds, of course, to the estate of the bride's home where the couple was to wed. It was a grand wedding. The bride's family was very wealthy and had exquisite taste, so that all the halls and rooms were hung with beautiful tapestries and carpets, the weaving burnished with golden threads. Tables were set with the finest china and glassware. Many sheep were slaughtered and many fish were prepared for the table. The wine flowed freely and the cognac, vodka, and champagne poured out as from a never-ending fountain. The Russian priest conducted the ceremony in the usual fashion, and the party afterward repaired to the great feast that had been set for the celebration. The halls were filled with laughter, tributes, and loud boasts about this and about that. Glasses were raised in salutes and eulogies to those present and those fondly remembered. The music played, the young people danced and sang. No one seemed to want to end the affectionate gaiety, the frivolity and joyfulness of the day. Finally, however, at midnight, after many tender hugs and tearful goodbyes, the groom's party and the groom, with the bride on his arm, regretfully parted from their hosts and the bride from her family, retreating to their sleighs for the trip back to the groom's estate and the couple's new life. There were in all 5 sleds, troikas, each pulled by a team of 3 horses. The groom, wishing to impress his bride, chose to drive the first one, and he lifted her in with him, loading onto the sleigh as well many fine wedding presents. His parents and sister, with a hired driver, were in the second sled, and his friends with bottles of champagne and vodka that had been showered upon them by their hosts were in the third. His servants were in the last 2 troikas, with more of the wedding gifts and the bottles of vodka they had managed to catch. They set out with only the sliver of a moon, but well familiar with the route they'd be traveling, having traveled it that morning in the opposite direction. Soon they lost sight of the bride's family, then the glowing windows of the palace fell into obscurity behind. The cold air began to clear the wine and vodka from the travelers' heads. They crossed a field and entered a wood, and then emerged on the other side into another field. It was at this point that those in the rearmost sleds became aware of some shapes on the snow in the distance behind them. The objects appeared to be moving, and though the sleighs were not moving slowly, these ominous shadows appeared to be overtaking them. The horses no longer needed to be goaded on to a quicker pace, but began to press forward without the whip. After a while, the horses started to pull against each other, and they seemed to want to escape their harness, when the mysterious pursuers got within range, so that the people in the rearward sleighs could recognize what they were. Their blood turned cold. It was a large pack of howling wolves. Soon the wolves had overtaken the last troika, snapping at the hind legs of the horses, driving them into a frenzy, which overturned the sleigh. Horses and passengers were set upon by the wolves. There were gunshots, but they were to no avail because of the size of the pack. The agonized cries and groans were heard by the drivers and passengers ahead, but there was no hope of rescue by the small party remaining, so they continued, hoping to outrun them. Quickly, the pack resumed the chase of the other sleds, before long coming upon the next one, which was also overturned. With that, the groom laid the whip hard on his own team, and they responded and flew ahead. Likewise did the driver of his parents' sled and that of his friends as well. Alas, the pack quickly caught up to the sleigh with his friends, and they too were consumed by the savage creatures. The groom again urged on his horses and waved to the driver and his parents' sleigh to do the same. But again the wolves, unsatisfied, and even seemingly incited by the prospect that lay before them, redoubled their efforts as well. Soon the groom was forced to helplessly listen to the shrieks of his sister and cries of his mother and the hopeless shouts of his father. Again he applied the whip, and again his horses redoubled their efforts, but to no avail, for the wolves continued to pursue this last remaining sled. He told his bride to throw off the wedding presents that were on the sleigh, which she did. But it was of little use. Finally, the groom halted the sled, unhitched the horses, and he and his bride mounted the two fastest horses. He shot the other horse in the hopes that the wolves might decide to feed on it and stop their pursuit. But that too was not enough. And when his bride's horse began to show signs of exhaustion, he shot it and lifted his bride behind him on his horse. But that did not stop the hungry wolves, and they eventually overtook the horse and its riders, and all were consumed in the night and the snow. The next day, some people from the groom's estate, looking for the tardy newlyweds, their family, friends, and servants, only found the bloody garments of the party and the remains of their steeds upon the crusted snow, with the tracks of the wolves all around them.
Tell me, comrade, what is the meaning of this terrible story?
The meaning? Why, it is obvious. The meaning is that you cannot satisfy the wolves, and you cannot outrun them. They will always chase you until they finish you off.
But who are the wolves, comrade? Who are the wolves?
The wolves, my friend, are the people.